3x10 tool that I can use with other people. Setting up 20 minutes for someone to go explore, it's a tool that I can use. Impulses still fail, tool that I can use. Impulses for 3 sets of 100, tool that I can use. Like everything is now just something that I can use to put into an athlete or to put them in an environment for them to learn something.
That was Brady Volmering, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Athletic Development Games. The new Athletic Development Games PlayBoost Library is an app that is filled with engaging games to build athleticism in kids ages 4 to 10 in a fun way that builds a love of movement and movement learning. Games include those for speed, hand-eye coordination, jumping, and the essential athletic movements. The app is great for parents and also sports coaches and trainers who are looking to improve their own library of engaging games and ideas for athletes. To learn more and sign up, you can head to athleticdevelopmentgames.com/app. That's athleticdevelopmentgames.com/app. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and great to have you here. Today's podcast welcomes back Brady Volmering. Brady is the owner of DAC Performance and Health, and he's continually evolving and refining core concepts of athletic development for both those he coaches and in his own personal practice. On the show today, he'll be talking about a variety of speed and strength training tools, not only on the physical or the mechanical level, but also on the level of intentions and the learning process that the athlete has in interacting with those tools. It was awesome to have Brady back on the show, and I'm excited to get this episode going. So let's get to episode 432 with Brady Volmering. Brady, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here, man.
Hey, Joel, thanks for having me back on, man. I always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah, one of the things, I've been thinking about this a lot, and Dan John has continually sparked my thought process with this, is kind of like the idea of making do and creativity. And you have like these given training methods or things in front of you, and how do you go with that? And I think one of the things that you do a lot of really interesting methods that you could say are very unique that I haven't seen, like this single leg stand with 405 or like the impulse training. I wanted to ask you about like, how did you come up with the idea for the impulse the way you did it? So what was the process behind that as you grew into that method over time?
Yeah, sure. So the impulses I first time I ever saw anything that resembled an impulse was from Grant Fowler on Instagram, like maybe 2018, 2019, somewhere around that. And he was using a reverse hyper. I think it was an impulse on a glute or a hamstring or something like that. And that's the first time that I saw it. And then later on, this would have been in 2019, 2020. I was running training at a facility out here in Missouri, and someone else had came out and he brought some impulses that he had been using. As far as I remember, they would use like 3 or 4 different impulses, and that was all. Whenever using them with chain, or we were using them with chains, it was like super loud. It was kind of rough because like you had to put something in your ears because the decibel was so high. But so that's where I originally got introduced to them. And then what happened was, like, after I left there and started doing what I'm doing now, is I just started to look at like, I want to be able to apply that impulse to each joint that we have in every direction that joint can move, that I can add another type of stimulus to the system, right? Because if we think about what a stimulus is, it's something that you put into your system. So, a typical stimulus or a normal stimulus might be, or not even normal, but just like one stimulus might be, you're lifting a given amount of weight for like 10 reps, 20 reps, 15 reps, whatever it is, right? That weight and the way that you're moving it is having an impact on your system. An impulse is the same thing. It's just a different impact that is being had on your system, right? Instead of moving something somewhat slowly that has weight, you're moving rapidly and you're impacting your tissues into something that immediately stops. That you immediately have to stop against or try to pull through, right? And so my thought process was, I'd been introduced to this concept of an impulse and what it was. I wanted to then take and apply that across as many different joints and across as many different areas of the body as I could. So then I started thinking like, okay, the joints that we can do the impulses at are like wrist, elbow, shoulder, hip, knee. Those are the pretty much the joints that will do the impulses at, as well as some spine work too. But then if we take the wrist, if we take the elbow, if we take the shoulder, if we take all those joints, I started to look at what are the directions that those joints can move, right? So if we very simply take an elbow can flex, and an elbow can extend. That's pretty much the two things that an elbow does. So, okay, we want to do an impulse where you're flexing and then an impulse where you're extending. And there's different lines and different ways that we can hit that. But that's the general concept is every joint that we have, take an impulse, be able to do an impulse at that so that we can prepare that joint in every direction that it can move to take impact and to take impulse.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about, well, where I had thought originally was that Jay Schrader had used that machine, like Adam Marshall. Have you ever seen that impulse machine where it's like
I
a
have.
little sled?
I've never used one
Really?
before. Yeah. No.
I thought that's where you got it for some reason, but maybe that's just because that was my first experience. I think Tommy John had one at his gym, and I mean, it was interesting. Like I could barely figure it out. You know, with this like the bicep curl. I didn't try it for anything beyond that, but
have you tried the rope ones?
I don't know. I have not.
Okay, because I've always wondered what the feel, because like I said, I've never used the actual impulse trainer, and so I don't know what that feels like. Because I know what the rope, I know what the hyper arm feels like, but I don't know what the impulse trainer feels like. So I'm a little like, I'm not sure if they're similar things or if they're a little bit different. Like I don't know if the impact on the impulse trainer is as abrupt. So I don't know anybody, I don't think, that has used both that could give me feedback, or at least that I've asked about.
Yeah, I feel like if you got on the fast impulse trainer, you'd probably like break it off or something.
That'd be fun to try to do for sure.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to think about. I know too, you know, with the creativity piece, you know, both you and I, you know, we work out basically out of our, you know, garages and front yards, and it's interesting to think about what tools you have available and how you get creative or find ways to use them. I know you have like a basketball hoop, you have a little retaining wall type thing, you do jumps on. Like, what are some things that you've kind of grown into in your area? I was asking you before we push record what your neighbors must think too, sometimes. But like, what are some things that you've kind of grown into in your area to express athleticism or use as a training method?
Yeah. I mean, I guess some specific things would be, so the impulses, like the rope that I use for the impulses, there's no specific thing that the rope does better than anything else. It's just that it doesn't have any give, right? So literally the only reason that I use an impulse strap or like it's basically just like a ratchet strap, because it doesn't have any give, and that's what I had in the garage, right? So when I first started using them, like that's what or started doing them, that's what I used. And then, I mean, really the reason that I haven't went out and gotten a bunch of equipment, and I've tried to keep it fairly minimal and just get creative with it, is because if I'm training someone else, I don't want them to have to need this like massive amount of equipment or this extremely expensive machine or whatever. Even like the hyper arm that we make, I'll still provide alternates for it if you don't have a hyper, if you don't have something like that, right? So that's the reason that I've kept it fairly minimal, is because like if I want to be able to help as many people as possible or kind of reach a lot of people, a lot of them are going to have minimal equipment. And there's a lot that you can do with just like, all I have is I have a barbell, I have free weights, I have a rack, I have a glute ham. Glute ham isn't even necessary. And then I have the hyper, and then I have like the impulse stuff. So everything, and I have the boxes, I guess. So everything that's like in my garage, I probably put together for $1,500. And I could definitely go out and get more equipment, but I'm like, then it just becomes, I'm not really all that interested in me just training myself in a way that no one else could use or apply. And like, if I keep just what I have there, then I can develop different ways to do the same things that those like other machines could create, but just figure out different ways to do them so that other people can do them without the machines. So, I mean, yeah, specific things that I found is just, like you said, I have boxes, but then I also just have like a wall that slants up. And so I'll use that for depth drops. I'll use that. I don't use it to jump on anymore because of the risk incident that happened. So I haven't jumped up on them, but I'll use those for depth drops. Like sprints, I'll just do in the street. Like in my yard, I'll do any crawling stuff that I'm doing. Even like dumbbells, I don't have dumbbells because you can pretty much do everything with the barbell or with a ratchet strap or a hyper arm. So it takes a lot less than most people think to, like, the most important part of training isn't what you have. It's the intensity of the stimulus that you give. Like obviously the exercise and stuff that you do 100% matter, but it needs to be intense enough for it to matter. And I think that's the most important part to get right first, the intensity of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I like what you said about not going overboard, or even really like, a lot of people would be like, oh, I have all these tools and but versus scaling it down to, one, just be more creative and purposeful with what you have. And then two, anyone who's watching, yeah, I have that, I don't have to go out of my way to get this advanced machine or anything like that. Like it's already there. And yeah, I think it's similar for me. Like the most expensive thing I have in my garage for training is actually something I wouldn't probably have anyone else train with. That's just like a 45-pound club bell. But most stuff is like just sandbags, like a hill, hurdles, like, like little like plastic agility hurdles. And it's so true. I remember one time, one of the better workouts I got in recent memory, I was thinking about this. Life's a little bit different with 3 kids who are, under 10 years old. And my wife's like, all right, we're going to the pool at this time. And I just finished all my work and I only had 20 minutes to train. And honestly, all I did for 20 minutes is I just took a hurdle out to the sidewalk. I threw a tennis ball over it, jumped over it, grabbed it, and just after I got 2 consecutive or 3 consecutive throws, raised it up. And I just saw how high I could get. And it's almost like, it's not like full rest either. It's just like, it's like you're kind of like you're playing basketball a little bit, and hopped in the car, went to the pool. But that was a really, if you talk about like a purposeful, like how time contracts for what you're doing, it's just one thing. That was a really, really good session. And so much so to the point where I've actually made a point to make a note of, like if you have all the time in the world, you can spend an hour every day, but it's almost good to have, even if you don't have to take the kids to the pool, to have 20 minutes to only do one thing and to just work really hard at it, because that's the only time you get at that today. So yeah, I'm definitely, the longer I've been doing this, the more I'm convinced of just like taking time to just do a couple things really, really well. And yeah, toys and tools are nice. I have some in my basement, but I don't go down and use them as often as many would think.
Yeah, it's like 100%. If you're, it depends on what you're training for. It depends on a lot of different factors, right? There's, because I'm also not like, I'm not trying to be restrictive just to be restrictive. It's like, if you have more that you can use 100%, let's use it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not like it's absolutely necessary. It's just like, let's get the first thing, the thing that's first right. Like the thing that matters most is that you're actually getting in, like you're putting enough stimulus in your body to create change. That is the thing that matters the most. You don't need anything else to do that. That being said, if you have other things, like that's going to help, right? Yeah. So, but also to your point too, where you have 20 minutes, there's a contracted time window. I think you can apply that even if you have more time, right? Because if I look at myself, I'm in a different situation than you are, right? I'll give myself, I usually have about an hour and a half to train each day is what I'll do. But within the hour and a half, I still want to have very specific like frames within that, where it's like, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start with, 7 to 10 minutes where we're cycling through these three things. And there's a very specific time limit on that. Where it's like, you get as much as you can out of that 7 to 10 minutes. Once that time hits, then we're done and we're moving on to the next thing. Right. And then it's like another, 10 to 12 minute block of this is what we're doing or whatever. So I think it's important in order to get efficiency out of what you're doing to have those specific outcomes blocked, et cetera. Which can also be like, hey, let's take 30 minutes and explore, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, we want both ends of that. Like there's time to explore, there's time to have extreme structure, like all of that, but have some very specific directed intent and purpose for everything that you're doing, even if you have more training time. Yeah. So it doesn't just turn into like 4 hours of, I was at the gym for 4 hours. I don't really know what happened. I'm like tired, so it doesn't turn into that. You actually get something that's very pointed or purposeful out of it.
Yeah. I think so often, like the very mainstream way of thinking of training is 3 sets of 10 of this, 3 sets of 10 of this, 3 sets of 10 of this. Or maybe it's a few complexes in there. Here's your block of 3 sets of 10. Here's your next block of 3 versus, and I think that's fine to have for, part of it. It could work fine for a period of time, especially if people are into it and there's intention behind it. But the first time I ever said in the weight room, I remember this very clearly. It was for Olympic lifting. It was instead of 4 sets of 4 or whatever it was you have 10 minutes and do as many sets as you want, and I saw athletes it's like a switch in their brain, and it's a little different density. But I think the thing that mattered was if you said, well, how stimulating was that set? The set that it was a time and there was autonomy and it was like they got to engage with it a little better. And, looking back too, I'm like, well, these are water athletes. So it's like, it was probably stimulating. Ultimately, the ultimate thing would be something like that in the water for them. But, it definitely left an impression. And so, yeah, a lot of times I'll write 10 minutes to explore rolling for especially when we're working with people in the online space. I'm sure you're very familiar with you're not there. Mm-hmm. How do you create a meaningful experience that goes beyond 3 sets of 10 when you're not there? I'd be curious, to see what you do with that, with writing those out too.
Yes. So I think descriptions are very important for online programming, right? Because when you're in person, you can sit there and you can tell them or you can give them some type of structure, right? When you're doing online stuff, if you're not there, the structure is the description, or at least that's the way that I think about it. And so what I do is, the way that I write descriptions is I'm going to look at it. And if I was myself going through this session and I didn't know what I was supposed to do for the session, how would I write it out so that I could understand what I'm supposed to do for the session, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say we take an example of something that I just had my athletes do this past week is a tackle and do a sprint, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, if you have set something up that you can tackle it, right? You tackle it, you immediately get up into a 10 to 20 yard sprint. If you don't have something that you can tackle, dive on the ground aggressively, mm-hmm. just kind of work with what you have within your environment. But the overall goal is that we want you to feel like you can aggressively tackle, hit mm-hmm. something, get up and take that into the sprint, right? And so I'll use those words to describe this is what we're trying to get out of it. You want to feel aggressive hitting something and then getting up and taking it off into a sprint. And then I'll give you some general guidelines, or I'll provide some general guidelines of what you can use for that. And I have the demonstration videos and everything, but then it's also, this is the overall concept. Use what you have in your environment to create this for yourself. But the description is extremely important, because if I just say tackle into sprint, I have my demonstration video, and then all I put in the description is, we're doing this for 20 minutes, walk back to recover, do as many sprints as you want during that time. If that's all I put, then there's no specific directed intent of I'm trying to feel as aggressive as possible mm-hmm. here and take that into my sprints. That adds another extra layer of intentionality to it. And I think that gets missed so often in online programming. It's online programming doesn't have to just be a white sheet of paper with sets and reps. It can actually be in a live document where you can take it and you can understand what I'm attempting to communicate to you and feel it within yourself, and then be able to go apply that within whatever setting you're in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wish, it makes me want to have a group right now in front of me and do that exercise with, because I feel in person, you're going to have the bell curve, right? Where it's 75% of people are probably going to hit it with pretty good intensity. Like a 10, 15% on the one side are going to just be smashing it automatically. It's just their vibe. And then you got 10 or 15% where you have to tell them, hey, hit it, get some intensity there, it's, yeah. So it's the way that language and how you write things out with an intention and stimulation. It's interesting to consider, because, it's funny. This is the furthest thing you would ever learn in an exercise science program in college, is how to cultivate attention and stimulation and to communicate the emotion that you want to feel in a set. So, it's,
that was not at all taught in my exercise science degree. Nope. But that's just understanding about understanding beings, understanding human beings. And I think that's a huge part of coaching. So yeah, you should probably do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So what, are there any other things? I really like that, like striking something into a sprint and cultivating that. Is there any other things that go along that line? I know obviously having a task related to sprinting is huge. It changes the equation versus, hey, just go sprint. Of course, having a timer is great, but there's different ways to stimulate. But I'm curious if you've found if there's any other recent things you've been doing along those lines that have been meaningful for you in that way, like doing the same thing, then dunking. Even dunking. It's funny, actually. That makes me think about dunking. Or if you dunk the drill where someone's trying to block it and you're trying to dunk on someone, that's kind of aggressive in the same way. And we don't think about it that way, though. It's just the last thing we consider. So, anything else you've been doing along those lines recently?
Yeah. So really. Specifically with sprinting, there's also one where I'll have them do I call it a squat stomp into sprint, right? So I have a couple different. I have an exercise that's a squat, land, depth drop, stomp, where it's not necessarily just a depth drop, but it's if you're going from a lower height, you're trying to actually almost punch a hole into the ground. So it's 6 inches, 12-inch box, and you're just trying to physically punch a hole through the ground with your feet, right? So there's that. And then I'll also do a squat, stomp, and do a sprint, right? So it's like you kind of get in a squatted position, you stomp down into the ground, you're trying to punch a hole through it. You do like 5 reps, 10 reps, whatever it is, whatever it feels like you need to just like energize your legs is the way that I think about it. And then take off into a sprint, right? So it's just like you're stopping, and then take off into a sprint. So I have that, but then there's also something that I've been doing with a lot. This isn't specifically with sprinting, but with impulses, it's like I'll do the way that I'll describe it in the description would be like 1 set until you get what you want out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and so like specifically what I've been feeling myself is when I take myself into an impulse, it's like I can feel that impulse send a shot through my body, through my system, and I was just like wake the area up. Where it's like it is absolutely maximal intent. I think that's a major benefit of the impulses is that you can impulse as hard as you want into it, and there's nothing that is going to get in the way of stopping you. If I'm lifting a weight, there can get to a point where like I fail where I can't lift the weight anymore. And impulse is just like there's nothing that's stopping you from impulsing as hard as you can. And I think that's a very unique stimulus to give a body, to give a system, because for me, I want to be able to stimulate someone maximally. Like for them to be able to take and direct every single ounce of their being into something without worrying about anything other than doing that. And with the weight, sometimes you have to worry about failing. An impulse, you don't, right? And so the in the description, what I'll use is like impulse with everything that you have into it and keep going until you feel that area is energized and feeling exactly the way that you want it to. So just by creating the ending of, at the end, we want your body to feel the way that you want it to. We create that as the end, and then it's up to you to create that, and you keep going until you create that. And so it starts to get the athlete to think and to understand, like, how do I actually want my body to feel when I'm done with this?
Yeah.
Like, what do I want that to feel like? Right? Because some people may have no idea. They're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, exactly. Like, what do you want your body to feel like? What do you want to get out of this? And so it helps them to start to fully invest, because when I talk about full investment, it's like and this is a Jay Schroeder concept of like the pipes, right? You have physiology, intellect, psychology, emotion, spirit. Well, like, what is intellect? Part of intellect is like knowing this is what I want to get out of it. So how do you actually take and engage intellect? Not just say pipes, not just say intellect, right? But how do you actually get them to intellectually engage? And that's part of that is like, this is how do you want your body to feel? Intellectually know that, now create that physically, psychologically, like use all those to create that as you're going through it. So those, I've really liked those personally for myself because it's just, there's kind of like some freedom there to be like, how do I actually want it to feel? And then let's go to work creating that.
Yeah, I love that. I just, right before we hopped on the call, today was like my podcasting day. I just had a call with Flynn Disney, who's a movement parkour training over in London, now Croatia. And he was talking, one of the things that I was just so good that he had talked about was the coach's hero's journey, which basically goes from an more explicit, which is like instructions, like do this, and gaining a state of mastery where you understand all the parts of something, but then you have to feed it to an athlete implicitly, or basically how they will feel doing it. Versus so much of coaching is just, hey, do this. And a lot of times the person saying do this hasn't actually even been through it themselves that much, versus, hey, I've taken this thing apart from the inside out, but now athlete in front of me, I'm not going to just tell you everything to show you what I know. I'm just going to give you the simplest thing so you feel. It's kind of like I showed Karate Kid to my kids who are 8 and 6 for the first time the other day. It's just funny because I'm sitting there like watching Mr. Miyagi, and I'm like, it's not probably totally perfect, but like I love the idea of a guy who knows everything, but he gives the simple feel thing, for the person to learn implicitly without even saying anything. And there's could be certainly more steps in the process than that. But one of the things that Flynn and I were talking about was, well, how do you give that athlete that room to feel and find and discover? And that's, again, something, speaking of things you aren't taught in coaching school or whatever, but like no one teaches people like, hey, here's the process of how to feel, learn, and discover in these mediums. And to me what you're saying on the impulse, like what an awesome way to teach someone to feel, learn, and discover their body in that way, in a very like closed and like Pat Davidson would say, more ground, because it's like it's a very isolated thing, a
very simple movement.
Yes, exactly. Because I was thinking, Darian Bard said something where it was a drill called run as I'm like laughing, I'm thinking about this because I was thinking about what you're going to get out of different kids. It's called run as fast as you can for as long as you can, which is kind of like what you're doing, but it's more. There's going to be way more places you could go with it, because you could slow down a little bit and keep going. You know, I mean, it's an interesting drill, or even like just running the way I ran the 400 when I was in 8th grade was just that. It was blast it. There's no pacing, and just see what you can do at the end. So anyway, sorry, it was kind of a rabbit trail, but I love that, how you've created that implicit learning situation for individuals through that impulse. Because I think people would, if you think about it like 3 sets of 10, you'll never get there to that place, you know?
Yeah. And full disclosure, like I enjoy 3 sets of 10 sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I shouldn't
like, hey,
bag on it too much. Yeah, I don't mean to bag on it too much.
Yeah,
There's just
exactly.
a different
like
purpose.
Sometimes I'll just rip out heavy weight for that. I'm just like, yeah, that's good for the day. But it doesn't end there, right? I mean, it doesn't end on either end of the spectrum. It doesn't end of just like, hey, go create feeling for yourself. And it doesn't end on like, this is the structure we're doing, just do this. It's just like there's a bunch of gradients, right? And this is, I think, a big part of what I've learned is that as I've continued to go through coaching, continue to experiment and explore with stuff myself, is at the start of when I was going through everything, I'd get something new. I'd be like, this is a thing, you know? And just like, this is amazing. We need to use this all the time. And then like, I would do that and I would reach an endpoint where like, okay, body stops adapting. And I'm like, we're not really making any change with it anymore. I'd be like, oh, okay, so now we need to kind of reintegrate other stuff. And then I'm going to go and try and find another thing. And just what I've learned, obviously, is I'm sure you have as well, is like every new thing now that I come across, I'm just looking at as like, I myself need to take this thing to its absolute and extreme level, right? Whatever that means. So that I know the impact and the benefit that I can get from it. And instead of it becoming the thing, now it's just another tool that I have that I can use with other people. That's it, right? A 3x10 tool that I can use with other people. Setting up 20 minutes for someone to go explore, it's a tool that I can use. Impulses still fail, tool that I can use. Impulses for 3 sets of 100, tool that I can use. Like everything is now just something that I can use to put into an athlete, or to put them in an environment for them to learn something, or for them to develop, or for them to grow. And then in that way, it's like nothing really ever gets lost or completely discarded, but nothing ever becomes the only thing that matters. It's just all of these different things can be put together to create, like, it opens up the door to create so many different adaptations, because you're not trying to say, this is terrible, this is bad. It's like, this is bad for the situation. It could be good for another situation.
Yeah.
You know, so.
It's the artist's brush. And that's where the more it's almost like you have to experiment enough with all these places, and then you have them, but then that next layer of mastery is now you understand where they all fit and where they can fit for the individual. And I think a lot of it's just intuitive, just spending time with the person or being in those situations. And that's even with like 3 sets of 10, like at 3 sets of 10, just like bro out, get a pump. Like that's awesome. But if that's all you have, that's going to be very limiting at some point. But I'm sure you could say the same thing if plyometrics is all you have, or impulses is all you have, or sprinting is all you have, or what, you know, whatever, or even like being really exploratory with everything is all you have, you know, like that could even get too much, you know. And hey, please let me do 3 sets of 10. I'll take 3 sets of 10. Like, you know, like I've actually been in coaching situations where the coach was so exploratory, you could actually tell like some athletes are starting to kind of check out a little bit, and there is that balance, you know, of what. There's got to be some like level, some goal, or some outcome. There's got to be some structure within it. If there are no barriers, like I think freedom is interesting, because if you have complete freedom, there's no barriers to determine what you're going to do. So like, I think everyone thinks they want complete freedom. I don't want complete freedom, because then it's just like there's nothing, right? Yeah. Barriers are there to create something for you to go through and something for you to do. And so I think that's extremely important of understanding. Even within exploration, there are barriers. Like there has to be barriers. Otherwise, like with the impulse that I was talking about, the barrier is that you're looking to get us to a certain point. Like that is a barrier. If I just say, go do impulses, end of story, that's it. And they're just like, what? Mhm.
So that might work for me, but that's because I have a framework for how to create a barrier. If they don't have a framework for how to create a barrier, then it's just gonna be like, this is dumb. I'm gonna go to someone that tells me what to do. Because to some degree, like if you're not telling yourself to do, if no one else is telling you what to do, someone has to tell someone what to do. Otherwise, nothing gets done.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Just Fly Sports online courses, Elastic Essentials and Sprint Acceleration Essentials. These courses are CEU certified and will expand your viewpoint on explosive athletic performance and skill acquisition. You can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab and join the hundreds of other coaches who have already jumped in. Again, you can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab to get started. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit about Aaron Cantor talks about like the outer game and the inner game. And like, if there's too much outer game, it can get too mechanical, too robotic, too stuffy. If it's too much inner game, it just gets like too esoteric and like just like eventually you could get sick of either. I find people can get sick of the inner game much quicker, especially if you're not used to spending time there. It's very easy to be like, all right, let's just go, And so, yeah, I do think the trick is being able to spend time in both and understanding just where to be with both of them. I like thinking about it as like a building too, or like a door. Like you have to have hinges on the door. You have to have an attachment point that anchors the structure that you're always working around. But then at the same time, you have to be able to move the door. You have to swing it open. Like if it's all do this, if it's all prescribed, then it's kind of like the door's nailed shut on all the edges, or you can't open it as far. You can only open it maybe a quarter of the way. And what's going to let you open it more is allowing more exploration and more of those items. So my rudimentary door example that just kind of popped in my head there.
I love it.
I did, along with training in your own training, Brady, you had a post. I thought you put it really well with like, superpowers. So that's something we're starting to talk about more is like, what's your strength? Feeding your strengths in light of your weaknesses and things like that. And as well too, just people who see your training. I mean, it's really like, especially as far as you've come since like 3 or 4 years ago, you post the progress pictures. Like your training is obviously working incredibly well. What's your superpower archetype? Like, what's your like core battery that feeds your engine, and how do you view that in light of the athletes that you work with?
Do you mean in terms of myself as an athlete or myself as like a person, or what exactly do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. Athlete. We can start with athlete. Like,
yeah. So athlete wise, like I put up in that post, like athlete wise, I've always been good at extremely like quick cuts or agility type stuff where, if I'm playing football and I'm trying to juke somebody, like that is my game. And I mean, speed's always been like good. Jumping ability's always been good, but it's really the ability to like move quickly, rapidly, like make people miss that type of thing, right? So when I made that post, that my point was like, if I were to take myself, like if that is my ability, if that is my greatest ability, and that's the thing that could actually separate me from 98% of other people, 99% of other people as an athlete, right? If I take and I try to design a training program fully around me attempting to just jump higher, and I try to like heavily bias that at the exclusion of everything else, that then means basically that like I'm not going to make progress in the thing that I am most good at. Conversely, if I take a training program and I want to stimulate everything it is that I can stimulate within my system, which is like, strength work, impulse work, duration work, capacity work, and range of motion, like I take and I include everything, that is going to naturally bring up everything that I have. And so when I do that, my core competency or my superpower, whatever you want to call it, that will get better as well as everything else, but I don't lose that thing that makes me most special. Because I think the reason that I made that post is sometimes I'll see people that are like, and maybe this is coming from a little bit of my experience where, I mean, I'm past it now. Like I really don't care at this point, but like when I was growing up, I probably should have played football instead of baseball. I was definitely more designed for that, 100%. So maybe that's a little bit where this is coming from, but I see people now that are like, they have something that they're very good at, but they want to try to do something else. Or try to improve this thing that is just like you're good at this thing, but you could be really like freaking amazing at this thing, right? And that's where this was coming from. Was like if you don't necessarily try to train to be specifically really good at this thing, but you train yourself as a human being to be very like athletic, to be very explosive, whatever, then you're going to like improve all of that, but the thing that you're actually really good at is going to improve at the same time. So it's almost like, don't get in the way of you getting really good at what you're already really good at.
Yeah.
And waste time on trying to improve factors that just aren't actually going to move a needle for you. Like I said in the post, if I jump, back in college, the vert that I tested was like 33. If I jump at 36 instead of a 33, it's like, okay, that's cool. But like my 5'10" was like a 406. If I take that to like a 3.8 or something, that could significantly like impact. That's a much fewer people have like a 3.8 than have like a 36, right? So that's my point is, don't get in the way of improving what you're actually really freaking good at.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the trick, what everyone talks about is how do you approach those general abilities, or you could say weaknesses or low hanging fruits, without impacting the main thing. And
yeah.
So that's, I know for me, actually, it was funny. I've realized for a long time that anyways, me and you actually polar opposite in a lot of ways. Like mine was more jumping and bouncing and those types of things. And the last podcast I did with Bill Hartman, Chris Wycus said it well, is he's like a tall, narrow ribcage, like ultimate frisbee. And I was thinking like, yeah, if I play ultimate frisbee or basketball, like those are my jams. Like that actually brings everything else up because it's bouncy, it's aerobic, it's problem solving. And so I guess the thought is how much to, I know for me, like I have to actually almost make my training to feel like those sports. Like the more training feels like those sports for me with, spikes of intensity, like that really is helpful. But then the thought is, how much of the art is, how much of the other things, because I've tried to be, I've had a powerlifting phase, which, I mean, you could say it was a fail in the sense if I went to a meet, it would have been a pretty epic fail. But I mean, I got stronger, but it pulled everything else down. So it's interesting to, that process of how much of the weak points do you actually get into?
For sure. And that's what I'm saying. Like for you, that would be, you just made the perfect example. Like if you just try to heavily bias powerlifting, mm-hmm. it made what you're actually really good at bad. Mm-hmm. But if you never do any type of strength work, you're also going to cap.
Yes.
Like on that stuff that you're good at. Right. So like you said, that is the art of figuring out or the art of doing of how much of everything is it that you do. And I mean, I think I definitely think I figured out like a good way to do that. How to actually put that into words, it's a little bit difficult, right? But it's like we want to, I don't know, it's almost like we want to stimulate it enough to keep it growing, but not do it so much that it holds anything else back. And so like practically that might be, you're doing heavy work, you're doing 1 or 2 exercises, or maybe like 3 to 4 exercises of heavy work each week. And that's all the heavy work that you do. So that's like enough to keep that growing, but it's not so much where you just get super heavy with everything else. And it actually holds you down and brings you down, right? So there's so many things that go into the actual practical application of it, but I do think that it's possible to find that.
Yeah. In terms of something like I guess if you were to say like your weakness would be like, let's just say jumping, plyos, like bounding or whatever, right? Like what do you, I mean, I mostly see like you doing more like drops, or you're dunking or you're sprinting, like those kind of things. Do you do any more what we would call traditional plyos in your program, as most people would consider it?
So in my program, and usually what it is like I'm gonna sprint once a week, and then I'm also gonna do some type of jumping once a week as well. And so I'm not sure exactly what you mean by conventional plyos, but like the jumping there'll be some types of drops, but they could also be, bounding. It could be I set up a hurdle and I'm trying to jump over that. I set up 2 things on the ground. I'm seeing how far I can jump over them. So the jumping that I do, or the plyos that I do, I usually try to create as some type of game or like actual measurement based outcome, versus I just am not that big of a fan of like
just hurdle hopping.
Hurdles.
Yeah.
Or like, that type of stuff. Even when I did the jump onto my bricks where I hurt my wrist, even that one, those weren't planned or scheduled. What I was doing is I was like jumping. I was trying to touch this thing that I set up at a vertical height. And I was seeing how far back I could jump from and touch it. And I was feeling really good. And I just like looked at the wall and was like, yeah, that looks easy. So I just like went and did it. Did it successfully the first time. I tried to jump up again, like actually stand up on it the second time. But that's when like the bricks fell out, right? But even those, they weren't scheduled or planned. That was just because I was feeling really good. But the actual jumping that I was doing was a kind of game type thing where I'd set up where it's, there's an opportunity to fail, there's an opportunity to succeed, which is how I like to set up that more dynamic work.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes good sense. Did you ever go through like a hurdle hopping, bounding phase in like college or anything like that? Yeah.
Yes. In college for sure. I can still remember, I remember specifically there was one day where I was going to test my 60, and just like building up to it, I've been so structured of, I'm going to do 3 sets of 5 jumps. Like my sprinting form is this. So I'm going to like do these drills to work on my sprinting form. 100% went through that. I ran 2 sprints and I was just like dead ass tired. I just couldn't, I was just like out of breath. And I was like, I didn't know it at the time, but it's just like something didn't feel quite right. You know, I was like so structured and so tight that I wasn't going to do any more than two sprints. But yeah, 100% went through that time period.
Yeah.
I would not recommend that as the best training.
Yeah.
The best way to train. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. That was funny enough. Like that was the thing I was really good at, but actually, because I was good at it, I let it steer me away from all the actual like fun, like dunking and like doing those like more gamified versions of actual jumping to what eventually became, in my opinion, became a detriment over time. So yeah, these days, I think, being in my 40s now, I would, if I had like 20-year-old Joel Achilles, I would do a crap ton of them and I'd love it. But for me, it's mostly gamified just because it's easier on the tendons. Like it's just a little bit easier. It's a little more joint friendly to jump in a normal like 2-foot takeoff because of the way you conserve and recycle energy and stuff like that. Typically, occasionally I'll do some like single leg bounds. I'm like, yeah, this feels good. I should do this more often, but I'm not going to push it. Like, yeah. So it's yeah. It's always a good experiment though. So what since actually this would be an interesting question. I was going to ask you, what training methods have stood the test of time for you and your training. But even going back further, when did you start like training, like lifting or sprinting, or like where you're like, I am going to train for this thing?
Yeah, it would have been 2009 or 2010. So 14 or 15 years ago now.
Gotcha. So 14 or something like that?
Huh?
So you would have been 14 or 15?
14 or 15 at that time, yes. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so and the reason that I started was, for me, it was baseball at that time. It was like, that's when I first started to look at like, okay, I want to play this sport. And I started to hear that in order to play this sport, like you have to train hard to be able to advance into like next level type thing. So I just dove headfirst into everything that I could read and started training at that point.
Yeah. So for you, having been through this all this time, people see it through your training, but if you had to list like 3 or 4 things that for you have stood the test of time, and like you said, I think you made a post about this, like, things have a shelf life. It becomes all about the thing and then it moves into a particular place. But how have you rotated kind of your like, hey, this is in my training, like this has stood the test of time? Like what are some of those main movements? Yeah.
If I think back to like 2009, 2010, what has stood the test of time from then? It's that I still, like, if we talk about specific movements and specific things, like I still squat, I still bench, I still sprint, I still jump. I was doing all those things back then, just in different ways. I wasn't doing any impulse type stuff back then. Obviously, I wasn't. What I would say is at that time, I didn't have the understanding of it's what it meant to fully invest in what I was doing. Like I was doing the exercise, I was doing the moves, but I hadn't figured out how to like tap in yet, right? And maybe that's part of a training process. I definitely think it can be accelerated, right, by someone that has done it and that can help to kind of guide you through that. But it was just, honestly, it was normal like powerlifting stuff that I was doing at that time, and I'll still do some of that, right? But it's like that is the thing that I started with. There's still some of that there, but like we talked about before, now it's just a tool. It's not the only thing that I do. Like back then, I thought that was training. Now I'm like, no, that's not training. It's training, but it's not all of training, right? And I don't know, man. Over the course of like, I've gone through a lot of different stuff. There's a point where I read like, I think it's Game Changers, like Fergus Connolly. So reading his stuff, and it was going into all the different things to consider in terms of, gameplay and that side of things. Like I read his stuff, I read a lot of other people's stuff on that. So I started introducing that probably, I don't know, 5 to 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And yeah, it's been fun. It's been interesting. I don't know if this is answering your question specifically,
Sure.
but I've noticed, like, for myself the past year or two, it's been cool because I haven't really listened to or looked at much actual
Yeah.
training stuff outside of what I'm doing, because it's almost like at some point you kind of start to read something, you start to listen to something, you know exactly where it's going.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so it's cool because then it's like, okay, now it's almost at a point where I can kind of like just start creating from what all the knowledge that I have, and like create from that base kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's an important place that everyone, and I think it can come up at multiple places too. I remember when I was 27 coaching, and I was like, it was my fourth year or sixth year actually of college track coaching D3, but I was like, I think I'm just not going to read anything this year. Like, I think I'm just going to take what I have and I'm just going to figure it out and try to just like let intuition kind of settle in on this stuff versus, like you're always learning, you're always trying that thing. And at some point you have to. So yeah, I feel like for me, I almost can't help it because I'm doing this podcast. So once a week, I learn something new. And so that's probably where I get most of my stuff. But outside of that, I do really, I have settled into, just you try to just let your intuition settle in, or the old stuff. Yeah.
Or the what?
The old stuff. Like Dan John talks about, like the books of the 40s, 50s, 60s. I like that because that was almost it was almost a simpler era, kind of like, you had less and you just created from that. So that always intrigues me. I'm trying to build out my library of that these days. That's kind of the next part of my learning. I want to go backwards and study that, give that a little bit more due,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think, I think it comes down to like the principles that work. If you can get down to the principle of it, then everything on top is, so to me, like a principle. I mean, I think I put this up on a post like maybe a week or two ago, but I was like, a principle of training isn't the sets reps thing that you use. A principle of training is like you hit your thumb and it hurts. That happens every single time. Your body has ways that it works like that, where it's like if you hit your thumb, it's going to hurt. That is, so to me, that's like a very basic foundational principle of how your body works. Like when you apply a level of stimulus and it causes damage there, your body is going to send feedback and it's going to send signals and it's going to have pain. You're going to have a response to that. Like that is a very principled thing that happens every single time. And to me, it's like once you get down to those principled things of like, it happens every time, no matter what. Like when you can start to lay those things out, then you know what a principle is, right? And then I think at that point, you can start to look at what everyone else is talking about or what you're creating or whatever, and you can just see, you can start to create things based off those principles instead of kind of going around in circles. Because I think for me, I went around in circles for a long time, like thinking this is thing, etc. Once you have a principle, then you can stop going in circles and just start to create from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you have that, it definitely becomes a lot more fun for sure. I wanted to ask you about isometrics, but before I do, is there anything that you're working with right now, like from that series of paintbrushes, either in your own training or with clients that you're finding interesting right now? That's like a muse for you at the moment.
I mean, personally, I've the past like 3 weeks or so, I went through another rebound squat and bench. Basically, the reason that I did it is I didn't have as much time to create my own program for each day. So I was just like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to do this every single day. And dude, it was, again, I mean, I got up to like 425 on a rebound squat, and I probably started at like 365 and just didn't feel that weak or felt very weak with it, right? So it was another reminder of, I mean, when you stimulate your body maximally, like it's going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
So that was cool. And it helped to remind me of like, it's okay to repeat things sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I think with a lot of times in my programming with clients, I'll always try to make it different, or I'll always try to make like some new exercise or apply some different stimulus. And so what I've done this week specifically with programming, because of that experiment that I went through, is like, normally I don't do impulses every day or have athletes do impulses every day. But in the overhead athletes that I'm working with, every single secondary session this week has had impulses in it. So I'm just like, I had a reminder of like, it's fine to stimulate over and over, and your body actually likes that and responds to it sometimes. Now, if I continue to do that for like 6 weeks in a row, maybe not so much. But so that's something that I'm just going back to a little bit is like simulate things maximally, and it's okay to do the same thing over and over again sometimes.
Yeah. What you said there too, I think about how training is different now because of, and I don't, you think about training 2,000 years ago in the martial arts in China or whatever. Did the masters get paid to train people, or was it like, I don't know, or is it just like you kind of had your compound, you had your garden, and you had all your stuff, and then people, I don't know. Like I had heard stories about where if you wanted to train in some dojo, you had to do a horse stance for 15 minutes at the front door, and then they'd let you in. It's like, well, you probably wouldn't make a lot of money nowadays doing that, but but it's like, but it is interesting because you think like, I even think of like Anatoly Bondarchuk's training, where it's like, all right, you're going to do the same exact thing every single day until your cycle drops off, and then once you plateau out, then we'll switch everything. But I feel like that would be a lot harder to do if you were not the national coach and these athletes are already with you and they already trust you, versus like, if it's like you have your own gym and you're trying to attract people and they come in and they're like, all right, coach, what are we doing today? Well, the same thing we did yesterday. Oh man, that kind of sucks, like, but if you obviously, once you have the system and you believe it, then and you see it, then it's working. And I just think about that a lot, like where there's these, what do we miss in that process of either trying to entertain athletes or ourselves? And I'm not saying a novelty is good. I mean, we all know that. Like you need to be stimulated. It's part of stimulation, but there's also a stimulation in, hey, what's going to happen to my body when I do the same thing for 5 days straight, 10 days straight, or anything like that. So yeah, no, I've been thinking a lot about that dial between things that are very complex and then things that are just very simple and rudimentary and back to basics, you could say, and how do those two interplay and what athletes will do better with which types, So it's really cool that you brought that up.
Yeah. I mean, I think even as it relates to business, because just to be completely honest, like this is what I do for a living, and I'm trying to build a business with it. Right. But it's, I don't want to sacrifice one for the other. Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to just have a business that is like booming, but that I'm like 80% good on it, in terms of what we're physically doing for the training. So if I want both to be like, I want a very good business and I want what we're doing for training within that business to be what I think we actually need to do, then it's on me to communicate that. Right. And so that is one of the cool things about doing it all online, like everything that is online, is that I can put out what it is that I want to communicate. And I'm going to get people that resonate with that I don't have to try to convince to do what it is that we're going to be doing. Right. So when you said the example of like a 15-minute horse stance or something like that, I haven't done that, but I have my other examples of like, they know that we're doing a shit ton of impulses, a lot of rebound reps.
Yeah.
Training's going to be very difficult. Right. But I want people that are willing to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want the person that is going to come and necessarily say like, I don't want to do this today. I'm like, okay, then don't do it. I'm like, honestly, that's usually what I'll say. But just, I think because of the way that I put out content or just what I do, I attract the people that are going to be interested in that. And to me, that's a very important differentiation to make, because I don't want to lower the quality of the training just to try to get more people in the business. To me, that the answer is like never to lower the bar. It's figure out how to get people to understand why the bar is there. And that is the goal. It's like always never lower, always bring people up.
Yeah. Well, those future students were doing their 15-minute horse stance. They were probably thinking about that before. I don't know. Maybe it's just like an urban legend, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's, it would have been interesting to be part of a training that was similar to that kind of thing. So, and I imagine too, those schools had a lot of repetition, if it's like Shaolin, it's like a lot of repetition, toughening your hands. It's like that's impulse training with your fists on whatever hard surface you're continually striking to condition the bone. So if you have someone who couldn't do at least something semi-demanding, 15-minute horse stance is pretty tough, but pretty demanding physically, they're probably not going to last very long in that training either. So maybe that would be something that would be necessary anyways.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny you say that because the like you said, the impact in your fist against some type of structure is basically, I mean, the impulses we're not trying to train your skin to be able to take it, right?
Yeah.
But we are trying to train all your tissues, and it's very similar to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. It's interesting to think about it in that way, because for them it was like, the bones like get thicker over time. You just keep doing it. And, I suppose impulse, it's like, there's probably a little bit of everything, bones, connective tissue, muscles, like those things.
Yeah, 100%.
So along the lines of horse stance, I was going to ask you as well, I know you've certainly learned from Jay Schrader. I find it interesting, like a system gets laid out, like Jay lays out, there's these ISO holds, and it's totally different than what at least anyone's used to seeing or doing. I've seen you do, I see you do a lot of wall sits and adductor holds, which that's something I never saw in Jay's system. I was curious, well, one, how, and maybe along the same lines of the impulses, how did you start to get into those adductor holds? Just because I think that is a very unique characteristic. But as I've learned more about biomechanics, it's like, hey, the adductors and glutes are like partners in crime. They're like on the, the adductors are massive. So I'm just curious how you kind of got into those various like long adductor holds and training and things like that. And then I have a few other isometric questions for you.
Yeah. So the adductor holds, if I back up from that and we look at, remember what I talked about in terms of the impulses, where we want to train all the joints in every direction that they can move, right? Mm-hmm. So if we go back then into adductor holds, I don't want to just do adductor holds. I want to do hip flexor holds, adductor holds, abductor holds, like glute holds, and some external rotation holds at the hip, right? And so the adductor holds are just one version of what we'll do to train the hip. But if we're looking at the hip, I want to train them in all those different directions. And I know, I've learned from Schroeder 100%. I don't do what he does. No one does what he does. No one does what I do. No one does what you do, right? And so there's things that I've taken from him, but I don't think he'd do something that is necessarily, I don't know. I don't even want to speak for him, but I don't think about that as necessarily like an isolated movement. It's still like full body movement. It's just, instead of like a lunge where the specific pressure or force is going more like into your hamstring, your glute, your calf, and an adductor hold now is going to like the more medial lateral tissues. Yeah. But it's still the same principle as a lunge, right? We're just putting force into different areas. Very simply, I started adductor holds because I want to train the hip in all different directions.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's funny that I hadn't actually thought of it this way, but where I've landed a little bit with that was just lateral lunge holds, and sometimes with the front foot elevated, but like the changes I get out of that, doing something like that into sprinting is actually phenomenal sometimes. So maybe that's how I stumbled on it. But yeah, it is like you said, it's maybe what the tripped me into thinking that is like the total body nature of it. It's not just, isolate this or isolate that, but it's full body thing. I know it's always gnarly to watch those. Like it looks like it's like full stretch load on the side, like you're treating it with the same intensity as a lunge or a wall sit. I think most people just treat it as like all right, do a few sets of this at the end of your workout type thing.
Yeah, no, like it's an important point. Anything that I'm going to put into programming, I think should be done with the same level of intensity that anything else is done at. Otherwise, like, why are we doing this, right? Because if I don't really ever want, to me, there is no such thing as a flat line. Like if your body flat lines, you're dead. If your line goes like you're literally dead. It's either going up or it's going down. And I think that applies to everything, because even like if something's flat, gravity can act on it and pull it down, right? So in terms of training, if we're going to do something, let's do it to a level where it creates some level of change. And that includes your accessories. We talked about this a little bit earlier. We're like, okay, I have an hour and a half where I have for training, right? But that means the last 10 to 15 minutes of the session, or the middle 10 to 15 minutes of the session, are still going to be intense with something that we're doing to create some change. It's not just, I don't want filled time. Like I don't want just dead space where we're doing something just to do it. If you're going to do an adductor move, like a groin lower is what I call them, I'll write out in the description, do this better than you ever had before, open up range that you've never had before. It's not just like do 4 sets of 6, move on. Yeah.
There's a specific, I've heard the term like living intentionally, like are you living just kind of going through it, or are you living intentionally? And like, even in my own training journal, that was something I only started it a month ago, is just putting a little intention. I get carried away in my training journal. I realize like I've seen like Dan John's training journal. It's very like, strict to the point. Like, and I'm like, if I get so carried away, I can't read this. So I try to write little, but like, just even writing the intention before the workout as a general perspective, it makes a big difference. And I think that, that's just something that's not often thought of. And so for within each movement too, and like maintaining that is just huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll type it out in my descriptions that I give to athletes when I'm writing it up for myself. I'm just like briefly writing because I know what it is. It's just like at this point, I know when I'm going to do something. I'm like, we're gonna, we're not just going in to do this. We're trying to create some change with it. But it's definitely important to keep within the programming for so that people can like it's that extra reminder because I mean life happens, right? You have athletes have school going on, or they have they have travel for like 10 hours the day previous. It's good to keep those reminders and to be like, this is what we're doing. Get present with it and let's go.
Yeah. With yeah, I just think that it's so easy to get. And that's one of those things too, where you see like an arm care. I'm sure you're beyond familiar with this, but like a typical like arm care prescriptive series. It's like 6 exercises, 3 sets of 10, like go do it. Like, how would you write out something like if it's arm care or anything like that, like how would you write that out? What is your variation intentions? And well, if someone, I'm sure it wouldn't just be that in the workout either, but how would you approach that end of things with the intention?
Yeah. So practically what I do is, for pitchers, well, within my program now, main sessions, secondary sessions, right? Usually the main session is kind of the bulk of what we're doing. For pitchers, the secondary session is going to be the quote unquote arm care.
Okay,
right?
Gotcha.
But within that secondary session, like, if we're doing impulses, that's where I would do impulse. We're doing it till fail, or impulse we'll do it to satisfy, or impulse we do it for 3 sets of 100, or let's say it's joint moves. You do joint moves for 1 set of 90 seconds. Every single move you're attempting to pull out more range and trying to do it cleaner, and you're trying to get like a better relationship with your body so that you know exactly how each of your joints move. Like I'll literally type that out from the description, right? and it just cycles through and it changes every day. But to me, I don't think about it as arm care. It's more training.
Yeah.
Right. And we're not necessarily trying to just like do something because we're supposed to do it. We're specifically trying to create some level of change in that session period. And then that's what I'll include in the description. But yeah, man, I mean, it's not just like go do these for today because you need to take care of your arm. It's like, let's create some change within this today.
Yeah. I was asking, Tommy John Jr. what his dad where he got his 3-way shoulders. It was like, I'm sure you've seen it. It's basically like you're just walking. It's walking 3-way or walking 3 shoulder moves. It's like you have light dumbbells and you're walking. You do like an L, a W, and maybe a straight ahead neutral. I forget what the exact 3 are, to be honest, but it's very continuous and it's for a long duration. And he had said his dad just did that for like 30 minutes just because it felt good. But it's just funny because, again, there probably was something like that he was seeking, that it took a long enough time to get the thing he was looking for, versus, hey, just go do these for, however many sets. I don't even want to say 3 sets of 10 because I feel like, by continually saying that's terrible, it's like, no, 3 sets of 10 is good. But like just continually putting things in little boxes and you check the boxes off and you're good versus, hey, I want to actually treat this as an experience. I wrote down what you just said there. I like fail, till satisfied, 3 sets of 100. Take your pick today. It's, I love that. It actually, I was, Richard Chavis has been on the show. I was going through some of his material and he writes his workouts out like that, where it's like, all right, today is, and his question is always, well, why did you quit? He doesn't even say fail. It's like, why did you choose to quit? And here's this, and here's this, and here's this. And you frame it all up in context of why did you choose to quit? And it changes everything. And honestly, even as soon as you are doing a set and you think of it from why am I quitting, I feel like you can go longer in the set just because you're more curious about the whole process versus just like, all right, just go till you, well, what you can always hold on another 10 seconds, So
yes,
it's an interesting way of framing it up.
I really like that. I've never thought about doing that. But like you said, basically putting the boundary being go until you decide to quit, and then figure out why you decided to quit. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it that I've never really thought before. My athletes are gonna thank him for that one.
Oh yeah, let me know what you find out. No, that was really, it was in his Moved Academy. It's like a free mini course or something. It was like his main. It's like, here's pyramids. It's like, it's all like the typical CrossFit-y sets and stuff that usually I would like just completely stay away from. But if it's under that framework, it's like, oh well, now this is really interesting. Now like this pyramid up and down. All right, like let's here's the emotional reasoning behind why you would do this. And I think it's more the thing that's more the put off with some of those high volume, you could say CrossFit or whatever type. It's just it's got to be hard, just got to destroy you, and you don't really think about it, you just do it and whatever. But it's like when you actually apply, from my perspective, from athletic performance, when you apply that mindfulness of why did you quit, what's the mental and emotional purpose of this, it really becomes so much more dynamic and interesting. So
yeah. And I think there's just one more piece on that. I think there is benefit in doing the simpler moves for that, like, why did you quit type thing.
Yeah.
At least like building a base with those, because they're, like we've talked about, they're more controllable. Because if I were to go do I don't clean or snatch, like I've never really done any of those, but let's say that I were to try to go do those and just do them till fail or whatever, and try to figure out like why I quit. They're definitely a little bit harder to control. And I think those can potentially be a little bit more difficult on the body because you can't control it as much. Right. And that is why I like the joint moves, impulses, whatever. It's like, they're so simple that you can't really screw them up,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's almost like there's this nucleus of stuff. And I think Richard gets a lot through sandbags, actually, because those are pretty simple. I mean, you could screw it up, but it's a lot harder than a snatch or something like that, or just carrying a sandbag, right? Like, so it's just having those little core things in your toolbox. Hey, before we get out of here, I did want to ask you, last question here is looking back. So you have 20-year-old Brady training or life or business or whatever, wherever you want to take this, but advice you would give to your younger self at this point, looking back 8 years, having got training a lot more put together in the time since.
Yeah. What I would tell myself is get out of your own little bubble and go interact with things outside. And so what I mean by that is, like, when I was 20, I was trying to learn and do everything on my own. And it was beneficial for me in the sense of, like, I learned how to be very self-determined and figure things out on my own, but it also held me back a lot because the progress was so slow, because every mistake that I made, I was so stubborn that I thought, like, this is the way that I'm going to do it. And then I had to, like, keep pushing into it. And then finally discover, like, oh, that's not the right way to do it. But if I were to have looked and found other people or someone else that was doing something that was similar to how I want to do, and I just literally go talk to them, like, that's probably something that changed for me a year or two out of college, is I started to understand it's okay to go to talk to other people, to see other people, see what they're actually doing. I don't have to take everything that they give me, but I can take certain stuff, and that just, like, accelerated my learning process. That would be the biggest things, like, get outside of my own little bubble and go start to try to experiment, or go start to at least, like, meet other people, get around people that are similar to you, because there are people that are similar to you out there. I put myself in a little bit of a box where I didn't think there was anyone that was, like, literally is like, I didn't think that there was anyone worth going to talk to or listen to, whatever. And I've just learned there's so much more out there. And it's like, if you find one person and they're not that person, that's fine. Like, don't just stop, keep going and keep trying to find other people and just keep learning from other people. And I think that's a big part of it. And when I say learning, I don't mean just, like, listening to podcasts. I mean, podcasts, like, definitely listen to those. But the first time that I took a trip was, like, I was listening to a lot of your podcasts. I was listening to, like, a lot of podcasts and just, like, working. And I was like, eventually I was just, why don't I go talk to these people? And that's when I took, like, a 30-day trip. And that just kind of, like, opened up my mind with my buddy. And that just kind of, like, opened up my mind to, like, this is how these people are doing it. They're not that much better than me or different than me, or there's not doing anything that special. Some people are, some people aren't. It just gave me so much more reality on everything within actual real world training, right? Not just, like, listen to something, look at something, whatever. And that really helped to open the door for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I mean, for me, it was like when I started this podcast, actually, was my moment like that. And it was changed everything. And then being able to meet some of those people in person too, like you're saying, like, not just listening. And you could say, you could say, don't listen to podcasts if you want, because I think there's that time to shut that off too, like, to be honest.
What'd you say?
I said there is that time to shut off listening to podcasts for a while too. I think, that maybe comes in waves just like anything else, but
like we talked about, I do think there's benefit there. It's just, like, listen. Then when you don't have to anymore, then it's like, okay, like, understand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, sounds good, Brady. Hey, thank you so much for the time today. Appreciate it. Always enjoy catching up with you and seeing what you're up to. So keep crushing it with the training. And I look forward to seeing your upcoming videos and everything there. So thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.